I think this might be one of the biggest differences, and I'm not sure, help me out here, but in Arminian theology, sin has no purpose. And I think in Calvinism, sin has a purpose.
Yes.
Okay. There's a huge difference. If I believe that sin has a purpose,
or God has a purpose for sin.
Well, that's what I mean, right. Then I would have to think God is a monster.
He works all things together for our good. How does that happen? How does he work all things together for our good?
He can even bring sin into line with a purpose and will. That doesn't mean it has intrinsically a purpose.
That he has an intention for that in that act.
When it happens, he can work it out into his overall plan and will. He can overcome it.
But what about Genesis 15, for example, or Acts 2, where it actually says God did have an intention in the act of the brothers' treachery?
Yeah, Joseph's story. Well, of course, Arminians and the Greek church fathers, who were actually Arminians before Arminius, believed that that's a reference to God's allowing it. That God had a purpose in allowing it. But God didn't plan it.
Well, then, if he had a purpose in allowing it, I just don't understand how that relieves Arminians any more of the burden of God's involvement.
See, Arminians do believe that God is involved. We're not deists. We don't believe God is just watching from a distance, Bette Midler's song or something like that. God is
or the wind beneath her wings.
Yeah, no, not that either. So, it's really hard to put your finger on exactly what the difference is sometimes, because we use the same language, but I know there's a difference. But I think one of the biggest differences is that we say sin and evil have no purpose. But God, in his good purpose, can work good out of them.
When God foreknows that they will happen, does he already have a purpose for it? And is his glory
He has a purpose for what he will do with them. But they're not part of his plan.
How would he have a purpose for what he will do with them without that being part of his plan?
Well, again, it comes back to the mystery of foreknowledge, and it seems to me that many people assume, and I think Calvinists and Molinists both assume, that God's foreknowledge is sort of that he sees a possible world and then decides to create it. Arminians don't believe that. We believe that God created this world and knew what would happen in it, and reluctantly allowed the sin and evil and saw what he could do with it.
So he did see what he could do with it. It was sort of
that he could bring good out of it, but that doesn't in any way make the Holocaust good.
No, exactly. In fact,
I see in Calvinism, it seems to me, nothing can really be evil because everything is foreordained by God for his glory. At least that's what all of them that I quote in my book say. I don't know if you'll say that, but all of them that I quote in my book say that.
Well, I think at least, speaking for myself here, I think that Paul's very clear in Romans 8:28, for example, in saying not that all things are good. And there is a hyper-Calvinism, I've heard it. Receive that suffering that you're going through as good. And that's horrible pastoral care. No, don't receive it as good. Receive God as good and God's purposes ultimately as good. God is working it together for good. If it were good, he wouldn't have to work it together for good.
Pastorally, Arminians say the same thing. Maybe the emphasis would be a little bit different. God can work this together for good if you let him.
Boy, that puts even more on me when I'm dying of cancer.
Give it up to God. God can bring something good out of this. But God didn't plan your cancer. Next question.